Crude oil in its basic form is crud, quite simply. It's thick, it's sticky, it's in a form that we can't use, so of course we have to refine it. We separate it, break it down, and convert it from the thing that it is to the thing that we need it to be. We, of course, convert all kinds of things for use. But conversion in the wrong hands can lead to disastrous effects, especially when what is converted is people. Predators are masterful at converting people, especially young people. And the predator I've been talking about on this season of Crude Acts is serial killer Dean Corll. It surprises me when people don't know who he is when I mention his name. Dean Corll was the John Wayne Gacy of Houston. He was the sick and demented man who was motivated by ephebophilia, which is like pedophilia, but his proclivity was to harm teenage boys. To feed his appetite, Dean recruited teen boys from his neighborhood, the Houston Heights, to help him out. Those boys were David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. We've talked about them. We've talked about the victims. We've talked about all of it. This is just taking things a little bit deeper. The boys who I want to talk about on this episode, digging into why they agreed to go along with him. I want to talk about crime causation theories, free will, determinism, and soft determinism. And I want to look at the boys and their crimes through those lenses. Really, it's to understand if the propensity to do violence was already inside of them. Were the crimes something they would have chosen to do on their own? Or was it because they were groomed by a masterful predator, converted, so to speak? Of course, to answer that is to pose another question. What does that mean for their punishment? So, as always, we have a lot to go over, so let's get started. My name is Jen Schaefer, and this is Crude Acts, a Texas true crime podcast, Season 3, Episode 6. This episode is titled Crime and Punishment. Sociologists, psychologists, criminologists, writers, true crime podcasters, we've all burned through thousands of pages of books and nowadays terabytes of cloud storage to understand why serial killers kill. Knowing, of course, that there are answers that go beyond the notion that some people are just born evil, as some may say, that there's more to it than that. Why serial killers kill has been asked so many times by so many people for so long now, it's almost trite to ask, but yet we do, and yet here I am, trying to understand criminology. Why do these people do what they do? In this case, young boys, teenagers. Why did they do what they do? For this episode about the Houston mass murders, I read a few books to help me out to answer those questions, which I'm sure I don't even get close to answering, but yet here I go. These books are as follows. I read Heinous Crimes, Cases, Causes, and Consequences, written by Frederick Reamer. I read Criminological Theory, written by Mac DeLacy and Kevin Beaver. I read The Forensic Psychology of Criminal Minds and The Serial Killers Apprentice, both written by Dr. Catherine Ramsland. And of course, going through all those pages, and I've scoured the internet, reading articles and all the things. Texas Monthly, I tip my hat to you. But what I've learned, of course, is that there are a multitude of theories of crime causation. They're known as etiological theories, and they are classified in 3 primary groups, of course, with several subfields, each with their own theories. I'm going to go macro with this, and it's really not only to save time, but because I'm newly learning all this myself, and it's just easier for me to talk about it in that way. So I'm just going to go over 3 crime causation theories, and they kind of just span the spectrum. So, on one end of the spectrum is a theory that's basically the free will theory. It's the belief that criminals have agency and choice, and they just do the crimes that they commit because they want to. Our criminal justice system, especially in Texas, is built on this. And essentially, it's you do the crime, you do the time. There's really no kind of middle ground in it. Here's the thing. People often like this approach. There's order to it, a logical chain of cause and effect. It's a simple story. Criminals are evildoers, and the only way to fight evil is with pure, hard justice. The public gets catharsis and a sense that the world makes sense despite the horror that happened. The victims and their families get some sort of retribution, which deep down, all of us kind of want for them. So let's think about free will, and let's look at the Houston mass murders case, at the boys in all of this. Most of us know, at a basic level at least, that killing another person is wrong. And killing 29 people, well, that's just monstrous. It's hard to read about this case and not find utter disdain for the killers. Dean Corll, David Brooks, Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. alike. When you read, or in this case, listen, about what they did to their victims, it sickens you to your stomach, it angers you, you want them locked up, you want the key thrown away. If you've listened to the season, you know what I mean. I'm sure you've been there as you've heard the things that they did. What ended the Houston mass murders killings was Dean Corll himself being shot and killed by one of his accomplices. And that is Wayne Henley. How we came to learn about all that happened between 1970 and 1973 was because Wayne told us. He told the investigators and he told reporters everything. And at the time, there was nothing like this case. The term serial killer wasn't even really coined. It wasn't used like it is today, for sure. We didn't fully understand criminology, much less victimology. Forensic psychology was still considered a new field of expertise. All they had to go on were the facts of the case, the boys' confessions, and of course, all the dead bodies. And for that, someone needed to pay. So David and Wayne were arrested immediately. They had a trial. It was all speedy, too. It happened within a few years. They were convicted, and they went to prison for the rest of their lives. David was 18 years old, and Wayne was 17 years old. Young men in the eyes of the law. Adults who chose a path of evil. Free will, you can say. And it didn't help that the accomplices, these boys, during the trial, when interviewers, reporters, the police talked to them, it didn't help that they came across cold, calculating, their actions declared sane and deliberate. And to make matters worse, it seemed they never felt sorry for it. And that's a problem. In 1976, 3 years after Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. went to prison, he had an interview with journalist James Conaway. In the interview, he was asked about remorse, and Wayne said to him this: "I feel remorse because I'm supposed to. That's something I've tried to build in me. I don't really feel about it, you know? I wish I hadn't done it. I'm glad Dean's not out there killing kids, but as far as any emotion to it, there's no heartfelt emotion." Later in the same interview, Henley went on to say, "I just figure I'm not a killer any more than a soldier is. There's a war going on, a war we're all drafted into. If you're caught up in it, you know what you have to do, and the guys that don't, they get wasted." Wayne said these things without a hint of bravado, even though I know I sound like it when I read it. He was just flat, like he was stating a simple truth. No feelings, no emotion. Just like he said, I have no emotion about it. We don't know, was it a facade, a regurgitation of words and sentiments that he'd heard before? Was there a void inside of him? The cold temperature of psychopathy, the inability to feel. We don't know because we didn't really look into those things. To go on with it more, to make matters worse, when co-offender David Brooks talked with Houston PD, he said that Wayne seemed to enjoy causing pain, especially at the Schuler address, which is the address that he first joined in on the killing. So he came into it enjoying what he did, according to Brooks. So he says this, and then when Wayne was asked about it, his response was, well, you either enjoy what you do or you go crazy. When I did something, whatever it was, I tried to enjoy it, and I didn't dwell on it later. It sounds as if he wanted to do the things that he did. He chose it. He knew it was wrong, and that thrilled him. There's no way in a million years that any of us sane, normal people would enjoy. I even know soldiers, they would never enjoy killing someone. They just do it because it's their job, but nobody enjoys it unless they have that side of them. I will say this. Wayne took out Dean, so that's a good thing, A. And B, Wayne was willing to talk about it. He's the one that led investigators to everything. He got it out in the open. He put a stop to everything that happened. David Brooks, on the other hand, denied interviews. He insisted he didn't kill anyone, despite the mountain of evidence against him. Maybe it's because he couldn't face it, or maybe he didn't have it in him to fake it. I don't know. But from the way I see it, David was the weak one of the trio. Like, he was the beta male, if you will. He was the quiet psycho, the Norman Batesy kind, which, was a lot like Dean, to be honest. And so you can see how and why maybe they were drawn to each other. Unlike Dean, though, David Brooks occupied more of that liminal space between pity and horror. I had a chance to speak with someone who refuses to pity either David Brooks or Wayne Henley. This guy's name is Bernie Milliken, and when he was a boy in the 1960s, he was actually chased down by Dean Corll. He was almost abducted, almost a victim. Luckily, he outmaneuvered him, and he saw the wolf in the sheep's clothing that Dean Corll was so masterful at hiding. He saw through him, and because of that, he's alive to talk about it today. But Bernie told me that he knew both boys. He knew Wayne, he knew David, he knew David a little more. He said Wayne was just a typical Heights hoodlum. He was always messed up on drugs and alcohol. He was always running the streets looking for trouble. But David was different. He had them fooled. He seemed normal, if you will. He got married, he had a baby, he created, on the outside at least, what looked like a normal life. But little did they know, it was while living that normal life, their friend David went out to Pasadena, Texas, and lured 13-year-old James Dramala into a house on 2020 Lamar Street, where he bought him a pizza and kept him occupied until Dean Corll got home and did those reprehensible things. James' body was the first one they dug up out of the boat shed. David Brooks chose to do that. No one made him do it. He did it on his own volition. And just like Wayne, he showed no remorse. In his confessions, Brooks told police killing was just another thing you did, as if he'd already internalized the awfulness of the task and accepted it. He continued to participate in the killings and was even known to get upset when they left him out. All that I've told you, everything that we know, it's devoid of complexity. It's just bad people doing bad things. The boys, the accomplices, that's just who they were. But I'm going to take a little shift here, okay? Because to dig into the complexity is to start to ask questions. What made them do this? You know, there's something deeper than them just being bad people, them just a switch being flipped, or maybe they were just born to do this. There's more to it than that. And the way that we go deeper is through another theory. So you've got the free will theory. You also have what's called determinism theory. This is a theory that criminologists study the environmental factors that go into creating someone to do these types of things. So their geography, their economics, their psychology, so on, to dig a deeper understanding. So hopefully we can figure out how to fix this. Dr. Catherine Ramsland relies on determinism theory to look at the crimes committed by these boys, specifically Elmer Wayne Henley Jr., who she calls the Serial Killers Apprentice. She titled her book as such. In it, she states that the boys did what they did because they were groomed into being killers by a masterful predator. Their environment, their psychology, their age, their economics, they all play a hand in it. The concept of grooming is considered relatively new, which is why we are continually talking about it. The Center for Missing and Exploited Children describes it as a process where sexual predators draw in victims by gaining their trust in order to abuse them. The process of grooming may last months or even years, and of course, it works in multiple stages. It's conversion at its worst. First, they target a victim. They look for certain traits of vulnerability. They then gain their trust by exploiting those vulnerabilities. They shower them with gifts, affection, attention, the thing that they're lacking, that they need. A lot of times it's just a friend. They eventually isolate their target, and eventually they begin to sexually abuse them. While the predator is doing this to the child, they are more than likely grooming the parents as well. Everyone is under their spell. With that, let's talk about David Brooks first. David Brooks was only 12 years old when he first met 27-year-old Dean Corll. David Brooks was one of the many teen boys who hung out at the candy shop. David was quiet, lanky, and awkward. His parents were divorced. His father was out of the picture. He had that distinct vulnerability. And almost immediately, Dean began singling him out. He took him under his wing, was nice to him, made him feel like he mattered, while his family, friends, and even the entire city looked past him. David Brooks was only 14 years old when Dean Corll started paying him for oral sex. $5, sometimes $10, always in cash. Sometimes he paid him in gifts. Around this time, Corll started asking Brooks to bring friends around, just for a party, he'd say, or to listen to records, he'd say, or to play pool in the garage. Sometimes Brooks got money for that, too. David Brooks was only 16 years old when he moved in with Dean Corll. When he walked in on Dean, molesting two boys tied to a bedpost, boys that he ended up killing. This time, when he found out that, the gift got bigger. Dean gave him a brand new Corvette to keep him quiet about that, and even made a deal with him. He'd pay him $200 to bring him more boys, $200 a pop. David accepted. Yes, you can see a little bit of coinage in his eyes and the money being something. But I also have to think, how scary that must have been. If he said no, he probably would have ended up the same way as those boys. So, really, what were his options? That was 1970. And let's fast forward to 1972. Enter 15-year-old Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. Wayne was a Southeast Houston kid. He's small-shouldered, blue-eyed boy with the hair the color of dry hay. He had acne-prone skin that kind of looked like he was always working at a sore. He was born poor. He was raised poor. He was from a broken home. He had an abusive alcoholic father, a checked-out, overwhelmed mom. So Wayne ran the streets. He was a messed up teenager. He was either drunk or stoned or both. He was born to lose, as some may say. I'd find him to be the boy in your class that you felt sorry for, but you were also kind of afraid of. Wayne Henley was only 14 years old when he first encountered Dean Corll. Dean Corll, who was already a serial killer by this time. David Brooks led Wayne to Dean to be a potential victim, but Dean must have noticed something unique about Wayne. He was street smart, he was cocky, and despite the booze and drugs, seemed to get it. But he also had a vulnerability to exploit as well. He was desperate to get out of his situation, to become something more than poor white trash, to belong to something bigger, to be important, to be looked up to. So rather than harming him, Dean hired him. He had already throughout the years hired boys from the Heights to help him with stolen goods. Dean told Wayne that he was associated with a criminal organization, a syndicate, and so Wayne started working for him as a thief. He'd break into houses for him, and the closer that he got to him, he began to look at Dean Corll like a stand-in father figure. A stand-in father figure, the serial killer, who was actually better than his real dad, the drunk one, who sometimes burned him with cigarettes or even sometimes shot at him. With Dean, now, and mind you, this is before he knew that Dean was killing anyone, but with Dean, Wayne had a place to crash, a car to drive, food, beer, and weed. Dean Corll not only provided those things, he made it a point of telling Wayne, you could be something, Wayne. You don't have to end up like your old man. Talks with Dean were fun for him. He saw him as this kind of elder mentor. They'd talk about guns and engines and speakers and the finer points of picking locks. He taught him how to be tough and stand up for himself. He taught him that, hey, if you're robbing a house and you're going to have to kill someone, you got to kill him. He'd say, shoot them over and over until they don't get up. Wayne was only 15 years old when Dean offered him money to bring him boys to sex traffic. $200 a boy, just like with David. Wayne had already been stealing for him, so this was a next step. He fully understood what he was taking part in. He'd been complicit in it for months. The money was real. So when Dean made the jump to murder, this messed up boy Wayne just rationalized it as just another hustle, a job like any other. He sought to make Dean, his boss, his father figure, proud. Dean Corll's relationships with David Brooks and Wayne Henley, the grooming is layered and multifaceted. In Dr. Catherine Ramsland's book, The Serial Killers Apprentice, she goes over what she calls the dynamics of dominance, how Dean Corll took the grooming process a step further, beyond his own sexual needs. Dean needed the boys to work for him, to become, as Ramsland calls them, his apprentices, to put in motion a bigger plan, to become what she calls compliant accomplices for a greater purpose. And we're going to go into that because I believe it was part of this sex trafficking pornography ring. That's going to be another episode. So he makes them compliant accomplices. Compliant accomplices are participants who accept a lesser role in murder due to an emotional bond with the primary killer, aka Dean Corll. Outside this relationship, they wouldn't consider being involved. They wouldn't consider killing anyone. Researchers describe compliant accomplices as having weak self-esteem from being isolated and subjected to verbal abuse and other kinds of abuse, and each had been leveraged with promises and assurances and or even threats. They participated reluctantly, but they stayed even when they had a chance to leave or do something that would end the relationship, because layered in those platitudes that Dean would say, he was also abusive to them, and he would also put them down, and he would also scare them. He tied David Brooks up and raped him. He would basically manipulate Wayne with, hey, you've already done all these things. The syndicate's either going to get you or you're going to go to prison anyways. He manipulated them in a bunch of different ways and made them these compliant accomplices. And then made this relationship, it's like an abusive pattern. The relationship became something that they craved. The ugly paradox is when nothing about your life, no one in your life teaches you self-respect, that even a monster's approval makes you feel special. And this, for me, is one of the overlooked cruelties in this story. That's what happened. Because Dean Corll provided these boys the things they had absent from their lives, structure, praise, belonging, a stable home, he was able to use that like leverage. And he used it like a crowbar to pry open that space between what the boys knew to be wrong and what they'd grown used to. None of that happened overnight. It was built in increments, each erosion unnoticeable until the ground dropped out from under them. With David and Wayne, their situations checked all the boxes of determinism theory: an unstable environment, poor economics, drugs. I haven't even mentioned that yet, but they were using an obscene amount of drugs and alcohol. Wayne, to put it bluntly, was just always fucked up on something. Everyone says so. He even says so. There wasn't a day that went by that he wasn't messed up. And this, of course, leads to psychology and brain development. In the boys, there was perhaps some undiagnosed psychopathy. In kids destined to become psychopaths, the signs begin in their teenage years. So both these boys had limited prosocial emotions, callous unemotional traits. They were cold and detached, of course. There was oppositional defiant disorder, it seems, conduct disorder. They were both dropouts from school, so on and so forth. We know all the things. There was also trauma, which we know shapes the brains, and their brains at their age, when this was going on, and even on trial, and even a few years after, they were not fully developed, and they were under extreme influence. So that's kind of the way to look at this through a determinism theory lens. But of course, I'm going to flip the script again. Just because there were factors in their lives that led them down this killing path, it doesn't mean that David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. shouldn't have to pay the price. I mean, 29 lives were lost. And they were not just killing them. They were tying them to a board. These boys were repeatedly tortured and sexually abused, and then they were killed. They went through the most agonizing pain. Like I said, it's hard to read about. Bernie Milliken said to me in some haunting words that when the boys were fighting for their last breaths, they weren't screaming out loud for God to save them. They were screaming for their moms. All of that cannot be forgotten. So when we get to a third ideological theory that comes into play, soft determinism, that's where we can kind of put this all together to make sense. Because this theory is the in-between, right? Where circumstances meets choice. A person is not just a vessel for DNA or a collection of childhood traumas. A person is also an independent agent who decides how to respond and what to do, even kids, even teens. So I don't know if you've seen this series. The series called Adolescence. It's on Netflix, and this might give a little spoiler alert. But if you haven't seen it, and you need to see it, it's brilliant. In episode 3 of the series, and it's only 4 episodes, but in episode 3, a child psychologist meets with a teenage boy convicted of a horrible crime. She interviews him, and you see this kid who looks and sounds harmless until there's a point where he finally blows up and he shows her the side of him that is capable of horrible things, and it was enough to scare her. And this is, of course, a psychologist that works with kids like this. And considering what he did, you realize, despite any circumstances, this boy is exactly where he needs to be, and that's locked up. So, another TV show, and this one's on Netflix as well, is called Mindhunter. And if you're into true crime and you haven't watched it, I don't know what you're waiting for. It is awesome, and I hear that they are renewing Mindhunter for a season 3. Yes, yes, and yes to that. I'm very stoked. But this is a series that explores the early days of criminal profiling. And it's based on a true story about a real profiler named John Douglas, who in real life interviewed people like David Berkowitz, who was the son of Sam, Ed Kemper, Richard Speck, and even Charles Manson. In season 2, episode 4 of Mindhunter, a female FBI agent interviews Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. It's a fictionalized interview, but it uses direct quotes taken from Wayne's actual interviews. In the episode, Wayne comes across mean, snarky, cocky, intimidating, self-assured, and scary. And you'll have to go see it for yourself. But I also encourage you to watch it in contrast to the real-life interviews with Wayne that you can find on YouTube. In real life, the real Wayne, he comes across differently to me. When I see him in the early interviews, I see a young man. Hard to call him a boy, though he technically was at 17. His responses in his interviews were just straightforward and weirdly devoid of effect, except maybe exhaustion. His words often kind of vacillated between uncertainty and stilted authority, like a soft-spoken boy playing dress-up in the language of men, kind of like the kid from adolescence. You watch him and you search his eyes and body language to see if he has some tinge of regret. And spoiler alert, you don't really find any answers. And still you leave it kind of wanting to know how a young man like Wayne Henley can bask in the approval of their abuser and then pivot fast as a gunshot to killing him and then giving it all up to the cops. He's a conundrum, I have to admit. You don't see much of David Brooks, but when you do, you just want to know if this guy is emotionless as he comes across. Was he genuinely empty inside? Or was his feelings just so locked up, so deep, he just never risked letting him out? You want to know if they're even telling the whole truth. Now, I can't diagnose them. A, I'm not a therapist. B, you'd have to meet with him in person, assess them and everything, but they show a lot of characteristics of psychopathy. But as we know, psychopaths are good at playing the victim card. They often exaggerate or make up their own personal stories, and they invariably blame circumstances or other people for what they've done. And you hear that from both of them. And by the way, that's a quote from Dr. Ramsland's book, The Forensic Psychology of the Criminal Mind. With all that in mind, should we have thrown the book at them like we did? Maybe even more so because they had the chance to know better and they did Dean's bidding anyway. Because if you believe in free will, you're obligated to ignore all the little things that wired Henley and Brooks for these crimes. Now, if you believe in determinism, and it's probably because you realize that humans are a sprawl, right? The most gloriously, pardon my French, fucked up Venn diagram of contradictions and overlaps. But when you do that, you just risk explaining it all away. And if you're listening to this point, you realize you're caught in an ugly paradox. At least there's soft determinism to allow you to understand the cause, but preserve the consequences. In practical terms, it asks us to see these boys as both victims and villains, which they are. And I know that it is deeply unsatisfying for people who want a world of clean retribution. But here's the thing, for those of you wanting to prevent the next Wayne Henley and the next David Brooks, it's really the only answer that works. Now, here's one last layer to that question, which brings us to the finality of this episode. Where are David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. now, and what should we do about them? The answer may be immaterial to his victims and their families, but it's still worth asking. Punishment at the time of the Houston mass murders was in a state of reformation. During the progressive era of the early 20th century, a medical model of approach was used. They wanted to focus on rehabilitating the offender through social work, psychiatry, sociology, psychology, so on and so forth. It was in the 1970s when critics began to sound off that didn't work, and rehabilitation became a dirty word. America's political mood swung hard at that time, and the pendulum came crashing back to a justice system that wanted answers more than solutions. A system more comfortable making examples than making sense. So when Wayne Henley and David Brooks went to trial, no one referenced grooming. No one mentioned trauma or neglect or the psychological scars left by an absentee father and shattered families. They were just simply called monsters. And monsters don't get therapy. They get locked up, warehoused, and left to rot in the darkness. Some people, most people, I don't know. Here in Texas, it's most. Most people consider it a good thing. And there's a side of me that agrees with them. So while deterministic factors can explain things, it doesn't make us any safer. We live among people with little ticking bombs inside of them, and they're raised in environments that feed that damage and makes their inner workings the root for what the macabrest concept of evil is with a capital E. Is there any way of fixing that? And are we safer with determinism, or are we safer with these men locked up? Is how we handled the case, then, sufficient now? Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. was initially convicted of murder in 1974. His conviction was overturned on appeal in 1978, and he was convicted again in 1979 for 6 of the murders. David Brooks was convicted in 1975 for the murder of William Ray Lawrence. His sentence was to life in prison, and his conviction was upheld by appeal in 1979. The boys were tried, of course, under the free will theory of criminality. They were convicted under it, and they've been judged by it at every parole hearing that they've had since eligibility. They've all been denied parole primarily due to the nature of the offense. Going back to that, evil with a capital E, right? One or more violent criminal acts indicating a conscious regard for the lives, safety, and properties of others. Also that the criminal activity had elements of brutality, violence, and conscious selection of victims' vulnerabilities such that the inmates pose a continuing threat to public safety. That is what they say verbatim in their ruling. So there you go. And for now, it's too late for David Brooks. David Owen Brooks died in prison in 2020 from complications due to COVID. But Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. is still alive, and he is serving time in the Telford unit in New Boston, Texas. His next parole review date is coming up in October of this year, 2025, and that's only a few months away. I'm not here to tell you what to think about that. The families of the victims are getting older and leaving us. They have all carried with them a pain that not many of us can fully conceptualize for fear that simply understanding that pain would just consume us. We can't imagine going through what they went through and the unbearable weight of sadness and anger. It's almost too much to even think about. Their only relief is that man who lured their relative to their torture and death is behind bars. The monster is where he should be. But then, when you're forced to walk through the whole story, it's hard not to see more than just a monster behind those bars. You see a man who was a kid who was so very messed up and found himself doing the devil's bidding. I'm going to leave you with what Wayne said in an interview, and I think this interview was like in the 90s or something because there was no date for it, but it looked like the 90s. But I'm going to leave you with what he said in that interview and a few final thoughts. So Wayne said to this reporter, "When I got involved with Dean Corll, it was like going through the looking glass, you know? Nothing was real. Nothing was right. But I was living in a madman's world." "Were you a madman?" the interview asked. "No." "So you were a sane man in a madman's world." And then he reminds her, as much as he does the viewer, by slowly saying this: "I was a boy in a madman's world. Without Corll, there would have been no crime." While I'm sure that's true, I'm sure that maybe these boys, David Brooks, Elmer Wayne Henley Jr., they never would have killed anyone on their own. But at the same time, what's done is done, and there's no going back, and there's no making it right. The madman's world existed. It punched a hole into this world, and it took 29 boys out with it. And Wayne, though a mere apprentice, lived by the rules of that madman's world, and now perhaps must die by them too, exactly where he is. I don't know if that's fair, but then again, I don't know if it matters. We're not done talking about this case, though. On our next episode, and I'm digging into this, y'all, we're going to start talking about the conspiracy theories, because I love them, and I think there's more to them than just being conspiracies. The conspiracy theories that Dean Corll and his apprentices were connected to a network of men, and this expanded across the U.S., that included well-known child pornographers, music producers, and even another serial killer named John Wayne Gacy. So stay tuned for that. I don't know. Hopefully it'll be out soon. We'll see how much time I have. For now, I'm Jen Shaver, and this is Crude Acts, a Texas true crime podcast. I want to say thank you to Russell Dunlap for sound editing. Thank you, Amy Dunlap, for managing all this. And thank you, Two Star Symphony, for the music. Thank you, listeners, for just being you. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Maybe consider even donating a few bucks if you have them. It's $3 a month, right? It really helps a whole lot with this. Content creators, we ask for money just because it costs us money to do this. And, we really depend on it to keep up the momentum. The more we do, the more it costs us. So we want to do more for you. Honestly, just listening means everything. But like I said, if you can, that would be great. Tune in next time. It's going to get real juicy. And I look forward to telling it to you. All right. See you then.